Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online, news that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thank you for joining us for Newsmakers. I'm Casey Counts. The American Indian program at New Mexico State University aims to enable Native American students to successfully achieve their post-secondary goals, producing graduates who, according to the program's website, are self-actualized, successful role models who are viable contributing members to the health, welfare, and peace of tribal communities and humanity. The program's director, Michael Ray, joins us to discuss these issues by examining our past, present, and future. Welcome to KRWG Public Media.
Thank you for having us.
Those are some lofty goals in your mission statement and vision. What does that mean to the average student coming into New Mexico State University's American Indian program?
I think it kind of means to them that we want them to be their best self when it comes to going back into the tribal community, giving back, and being able to also look and work with the rest of the community, the rest of the nation, as it talks about humanity. Because we want to make sure that students feel that whatever they do, even when they're working in their tribal community, they're always going to be looking at working with outside communities, being that they will always work with a federal, county, city, national government system, even international as well, when working with our tribal communities.
What does the program offer Native American students that they wouldn't get otherwise?
So one of the things that we offer when it comes to our particular area that we're at in New Mexico State University is that sense of community. We know some of our areas are a little bit further compared to some other universities. So what we do is we try and make sure that the students have a sense of community on campus. That way they feel that we're not just here to process or go through clerical work when it comes to them being on campus, but it's really, truly, we want to make sure that they had what we might not have had when we went through the educational process. So when it comes to just having our commons area where they can relax, they can enjoy, they can recharge with a cup of coffee. We have a Keurig machine in our area, because sometimes it's just a cup of coffee. It's the small little things that make that a little bit more of a way to get through the day. And we want to make sure that they're not feeling that it's all hard work when it comes to the college experience. But it's that network and relationship building that they're going to be doing that's going to last them for the rest of their life.
Now, I guess it was about 13 years ago maybe that you were here at KRWG to talk about the dedication of the building where you're housed. And on the website it displays some of the other special areas that exist in the building, like a beautiful meditation room.
Most definitely. And this is one of the biggest things that we wanted to get out there. It's unfortunately a hidden gem on campus right now. And when we say a hidden gem, that's not necessarily the best thing. You know, we want that everybody to use that area on campus. The meditation room is one of those places where if students just need to have that calm, relaxing time period, being that our dorms aren't necessarily the quietest of places in the university, we wanted them to have that as there for them. But also, we do have a nice hidden feature to that building and that room when it comes to, it is very acoustically sound. So if you were to stand in the middle of that in that room, you could hear your own thoughts or you could hear your own voice. One of the things, we all have our cell phones, so we can all reach out to our family, mom, dad, grandmas, grandpas, aunties, uncles, kind of give them the pep talk of, you're doing okay, you're good, keep on going. I always say we will always be the biggest cheerleader for our students at the university, but sometimes the students need to hear that from themselves. And it's that self-thought that can sometimes be the hardest part. So if they want to come on in, talk to themselves, saying you're doing a good job, keep on going, that is one of the things we can offer.
Now, depending upon where students come from, I imagine that life on the campus of New Mexico State University can be very different than how they grew up. How do they adjust to that?
It is quite of an adjustment. So from our students who are very rural, it is definitely not necessarily having to go an hour's drive, 2 hours drive, 3 hours drive to the nearest Walmart. We know Walmart is just right up the street. But for some of our students who are from larger urban areas, it is definitely a culture shock to what it's not necessarily, it's going to take me 5 seconds to drive a mile as opposed to 2 hours to drive the mile. Being that we have students who are coming from all over the country, we also have our international students coming in from Canada, Mexico. We have yet to have a student come from New Zealand. We're looking forward to that one of these days. But however, students to have their indigeneity, because of course we look about Canada when it comes to those First Nations individuals who come down to NMSU and they're used to the cities of Toronto, to Quebec, and we want to make sure that they have that sense of community, and it's a little bit slower paced. You know, we always talk about New Mexico being the land of mañana. We want to make sure that students feel that this is that sense of community, that sense of well-being, that sense of home that they can always come back to.
Let's talk a little bit about your home and your background.
Okay.
Tell us about your pueblo.
So I'm from the Pueblo of Laguna. I always talk about that when it comes to that is the community that raised me. I was raised by my grandparents. So I went through the whole educational system that Laguna has to offer when it comes to Laguna Prahi Head Start, Laguna Elementary School, Laguna Middle School, and Laguna Acoma High School. So we always talk about the community that shapes us. And I really enjoy having that sense for any of our students who are coming from their own reservations, because we can have that compare and contrast of what it was like when we grew up. So I remember growing up, being on my bike, going to visiting friends all over the different areas in our reservation and our various villages. In particular, I'm from the village of Casablanca. So when it comes to that, we have our store kind of up the road from us. So it was always that, okay, how far can I go on my bike before I get scolded? Or also when it comes to how long can I get out before we can go have to be called back in.
I think that's probably something that kids of all backgrounds can identify with. Let's talk about education, and certainly considering the Yazzie case here in New Mexico, I think it really showed the world the disparities that exist in education for Native American communities and also Hispanic communities in New Mexico. What progress have you seen take place in New Mexico? Do you think that policymakers are acting adequately to address that?
Yazzie Martinez versus New Mexico is really interesting when it comes to all of the different areas that are put in there, the 4 pillars that are part of that. I know the state likes to say that it's doing a good job, but we really do see some disparities in our larger areas. We're not necessarily seeing that culturally minded curriculum utilized in the school system, and right now we are seeing some of that when it comes to it only being a part of the social studies. But it's like, how do we integrate culture in all of the areas when it comes to English, when it comes to mathematics, when it comes to all these different areas that the educational system of elementary, middle school, and high school has to offer. So I'm really interested to see what we're going to be doing, but also when it comes to the dual language, the ELL learning portions of it, the special needs individuals that are going to be going through the process as well. We want to make sure and see how students can feel it's not a deficit, but it's a strength that a lot of our students have going through the system. And for some of our ELL students, they see the world in a very unique way when it comes to whatever language that they have as their primary, and the secondary language of English, maybe Spanish, maybe, and how that can enhance their studies of how their view system is completely different than us that may be monolingual.
Preserving language is obviously such a huge consideration for so many of our Native peoples. How do you feel that public education can address that? And do you feel that it's the job of public education to do that, and how?
It can definitely support that. We have heard in some of our areas where public education is doing a good job when it comes to teaching languages, whether that be a tribal language, Spanish, English, any other language we have. But sometimes it's the cooperation of the home that also has to come on into that. We see that sometimes the older generation will have a grasp of a traditional language. The younger generation have a grasp of it due to the awesome things that they're doing in school. But sometimes back at home where that middle generation might not have had that much support, or having a little bit of a loss, because there's this sense of, what are they saying? I can't converse with them as much as I could when they're speaking English. So definitely, if there was also some outreach to parents within our educational system. I know here in Las Cruces Public School, they have the Spanish classes for adults, which is amazing. And if we could offer that in other areas, I think that would help out when it comes to this whole cycle of language immersion.
So maybe there's already an example to grow from. I want to go back just a little bit, not that far into history, to address what we've been hearing so much about now, and that's the boarding school legacy that Native children experienced. What effect do you think that still plays on later generations today?
I mean, as we look at that, like you said, it's not too far back. Some of our elders right now remember what it was like to be taken from their homes. This was definitely part of the termination area for Native American communities when it comes to General Pratt's motto of kill the Indian to save the man. They were taken away from their communities, put into residential boarding schools, sometimes various states away. And this was one of those times where culture, language, hairstyle, length was kind of stripped away. So we had people who, you can see those photographs where they would have their native regalia on, of what would they be at home, put into a uniform system when it comes to all of their hair taken off, pretty much their identity stripped away from them, as if they were being put into military. So it's a very interesting part that students had to go through that, and then returning back into the tribal communities where you might have that culture taken away. And when you try and do things in the community, not knowing what's going on, not knowing how to speak with one another, you have that whole generation where, like I was just mentioning, might not have had that opportunity to learn the language, and how that historical ramifications are still happening now within our previous example. So it's really interesting to see how that has shaped a lot of things moving forward, especially when it comes to names. There are certain Navajo surnames that are only there because of the misinterpretation of those who were coming to get students or kids when they were going out to their area. So it's really interesting how that has not only shaped education, but has shaped even culture and community moving forward.
Yeah. We've talked about the disparities that exist in education. They're also there in healthcare. And so I want to talk a little bit about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which obviously just highlighted disparities that were already there.
Yes.
Is the state or the nation responsible for doing more to address those? And how do you think that looks?
In our COVID time period, one of the things that was kind of highlighted in New Mexico is that a lot of our tribal communities were very, 199%, 97% when it comes to the vaccination rates, which is amazing because that want to be healthy, that want to come back to community was great. The biggest thing that was a difficulty is goods and services. As mentioned before, if you're under a quarantine and you can't go to that 3-hour away store to go pick up necessities, it was very taxing upon individuals. But when it comes to the health service, we know this even as an example through our military and veterans areas when it comes to VA health centers. There's a lot of need out there, and unfortunately our federal government has just not been able to put a level of that care. It is in those treaties that they will provide health service. It said nothing about the adequacy or the advance when it comes to the health service that was going to be provided. So sometimes it can be a little minimal of what is provided there at our Indian health services, but it is something that is available.
We heard in some communities, some minority communities, there were lesser vaccination rates, perhaps because there was less trust of the vaccine or of the government in general when it comes to healthcare. To what do you credit the Native community's trust in order to get vaccinated?
I think that's where, we're just talking about the Indian Health Service has that different relationship, but also that the Indian Health Service also employs a lot of the tribal community in those areas. So it's not necessarily as you're trusting a government agent. No, that's our cousin. That's our auntie, that's our grandma that works at the health center. So there was a little bit more of that trust when it comes to the tribal community. But also, as mentioned before, we love to come together when it comes to our feast days, our cultural doings, and religious doings. So the sooner we were able to get through this pandemic, the sooner we were able to get back to our normal lives.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about environmental issues. We obviously, there's a lot going on in New Mexico, from new regulations to limit emissions from oil and gas, to folks on the other side saying the state isn't doing enough. How do you feel that tribal communities fall in when it comes to these issues?
So it's really interesting when it comes to how tribal communities are heard when it comes to this, because we do have our 19 Pueblos, our 3 Apache areas, and our Navajo Nation that kind of come together when it comes to voicing their opinion. sometimes it's heard, sometimes it's not. That's where we kind of rely upon the Department of the Interior to help out when it comes to those conversations, being that they're supposed to be looking after the welfare, or at least elevating that voice for our 576 individual Pueblos, tribes, and nations that are here in the United States. But it is kind of difficult when it comes to the oil and gas, because right now in the Navajo Nation, there has been a lot of job loss due to the oil industry up in that area, and that does have its difficulties when it comes to our tribal communities. So it's often a double-edged sword, where there's a part of the state who really does not want things going on, and a different part of the state where they're really relying upon that area.
And one of those areas now that we're talking about is Chaco Canyon, and whether there should be drilling within the 10-mile buffer zone around that very special place. How do you feel that that's going to develop?
It's going to be very interesting when it comes to what is that safe zone, as we have seen in many other states right now when it comes to the utilization of oil. It doesn't really leave a sound earth. We hear about earthquakes that are happening in so many different areas. We would hate to lose a historic, significant site to those areas. We often bring up, when it comes to Chaco Canyon, as similar to a holy site. Would we want to drill right next to the Vatican if that was kind of similar in those areas? No, we would want to protect these areas, but I'm sure we can find various ways to go in resources when it comes to that resource management portion of it. And that's just where hopefully we're looking to the future of those students that we talked about earlier, who are looking for alternative ways to utilize that.
You mentioned the Department of the Interior. Let's talk about the significance of a New Mexican and a Native woman, Deb Haaland, being given that role as secretary.
Yeah, she definitely earned that role through the process of going through the election cycle, and being her as a cabinet secretary here in New Mexico when it comes to the Indian Affairs Department. But it is great to see that there is a Native person being able to advocate on behalf of other Native American people as well, being that she understands some of those unique relationships that were mentioned beforehand on how to advise, how to advocate with our tribal communities towards different areas. I know definitely there's going to be a time where we need to look forward to seeing who's going to be next, when it comes to those areas, because she's the first female cabinet secretary who's Native American to be in this area. It had been hundreds of years since we had our last Native American cabinet secretary in that area. So we're hoping that it's not going to take another 100 years forward to have the next one.
Right, and how does representation look for Native people elsewhere in government?
Yes, and that's one of the biggest things we want to make sure. Just like we have here at the university, we have that conversation of how representation matters, especially for those next generation of political people who are going to go into those areas. They want to see that they're not going to be the first one that's going to be there, because sometimes when you're the first one, you have everything on your plate. You are responsible for so much, and that's where we give a lot of props to Deb Haaland, because she's taken on a lot being that spokesperson, and we look forward to having more Native American representation, whether it be from this area or any other area across the United States. With
the time we have left, I want to address something that she has talked a lot about, and that's the missing and murdered Indigenous people. We see that there are as many as 1,500 outstanding cases, but there are only maybe 116 being investigated or officially noted. What do you attribute that problem to ultimately, and how does it get fixed?
The fix is a big, giant thing because it's multi-pronged. One of the things that have just been recently coming up is that there are some missing and murdered individuals who have been taken from our tribal lands and being put in rehab facilities in the different states of Arizona and others, where they're being put on welfare, but once they get on that, the medical facilities are still putting them back on the streets and utilizing that system. So unfortunately, the healthcare system is also a part of this, and not necessarily just when it comes to human trafficking or different other areas. So it's going to be a multi-stepped function when it comes to finding a solution to this. But I guess it's also going down to that care. How do we care for people? How does the city care for the people that are homeless and not finding a place to live?
And we know that Native women are much more likely to encounter violence than women in other communities. So when we do talk about those situations, what are your thoughts on addressing that?
And this is really difficult when it comes to even just law enforcement right now. You know, when it comes to the Big Seven, the part of the Seven Major Crimes Act, there is only so much a city can do or a county can do when helping with domestic violence issues on reservations. You know, we do have law enforcement within our tribal communities, but they're also very spread thin. If you look at the Navajo Nation, they often say that it's the size of West Virginia, but they might not have as adequate law enforcement officers to go into some of our rural communities. So hopefully as processes go and improve, we can have increased law enforcement, but also when it comes to that, it is a policy where they can only go after Native Americans and not necessarily any other community members that might be there.
And some studies also show that many of these crimes are perpetrated by people who don't live on the reservation and come onto tribal lands. Do you see that as a big problem?
It can definitely be. So that's where if we could have some cross-deputization or any portion where they are able to not necessarily only look over Native American individuals, but over any other individuals. And this can sometimes be if individuals are not from that community. So it can be a Native who is not on that community, but from a different community as
Lots
well.
of complicated issues to talk about, and I know we could go on for quite some time, but we are out of time. So I want to say, Michael Ray, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us to discuss these important issues. We really appreciate it.
And thank you as well.
In Living Here, producer Christian Valle introduces us to Las Crucen Randy Granger, a Native American artist who creates contemporary Native American music. His lifelong passion has allowed him to play a number of instruments, and he is an award-winning singer-songwriter.
I wanted to be a musician, I think pretty much like everyone else does, really early on. By the age of 11, I had been singing for weddings and quinceañeras and funerals and all that kind of thing. So I would stand in front of the mirror with a tennis racket, literally, and a hairbrush, and I'd be singing. I just got this excitement about the energy from the music. Then by the time that I went to high school, I practiced really hard, and I was very disciplined for some strange reason, I don't know. The instructors there at the high school band department, they said, "Have you ever thought of doing this as a profession?" Deep peace of the running wave. I would say that my style of music is kind of, what I would call Southwest Americana. In other words, I really draw from the Southwest where I've always lived for the most part. It incorporates and fuses Native American music as Native American flutes, drums. I do a lot of storytelling. I do a lot of creation stories and that kind of thing. But then I also fuse it with some instruments like these things called the hand pans that are really pretty incredible. They're new instruments. They've only been around since the year 2000. My favorite instrument is definitely my voice, just because it's the most unadorned and the most expressive and the most pure in the sense that it connects directly to your breath and to your emotion. So you have to be in a really calm state to deliver something really good. Have the gentle night. And during my shows, I sing a lot in a cappella without instruments. And I find that people come to me afterwards and say that was the most touching part. And like, well, why do you bring all these instruments, My music comes to me in so many different ways. Sometimes I'll just be walking and I'll hear a bird, or I'll hear a certain rhythm of my footfalls. That'll get me going. Sometimes I'll be driving across the country and a melody just comes to me out of nowhere, or a certain lyric, or I'll be in a coffee shop and I'll overhear a conversation and I'll go, oh, that would make a great song, you know. The music doesn't come first, or the words don't come first, or the melody. They all just kind of randomly happen, and sometimes I'm lucky when they stick to me. I was featured for the first Music Spotlight on KRWG. I was really honored. I was really touched by that. The other side, I was thinking, I'm the first one. Uh-oh. Didn't work out the kinks yet, but it was beautiful. It was a great experience. The footage I came away with that was just luscious and beautiful, and I appreciate what KRWG does. I really feel that Las Cruces and the Mesilla Valley has incredible musicians. We're blessed with some just world-class people. So thank you, you know, for helping us out and for saying, look, we have it. It's not just in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, you know. My takeaway from being a musician is that music bypasses our critical brain and our thinking brain. It goes immediately to some part of here, some emotional center that we all have. The best place to hear my music is to come to my shows, because there's nothing like a live show. That energy, that exchange, like I was telling you about, it's real, it's measurable, and it's palpable. And if you can't do that, you can go to my website, randygranger.net. There's links to all the places you can buy. You can buy it from me directly or from my fulfillment center, or you can go to iTunes, you can go to CD Baby, Amazon, but you can also go to Spotify, and I'm on Pandora. I'd say however way that you find to listen to my music and to, you know, download it is fine with me. It's all good. You know, thank you for the people who take a chance on new music that they've never heard, or an artist that they've never heard. It's really easy to get in our ruts of we only listen to this style. You know, I only like 80s music, I only like 70s music, I only like 60s music. It's all related. There's only so many notes you can have. There's only so many chord changes and chord progressions. It's the emotion and the intention that the artist is putting behind it that you're going to respond to mostly. So really, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for listening.
That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday, it's Morning Edition from 5 a.m. to 9, Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now from noon to 2, and All Things Considered 4 to 7 p.m. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd like to hear from you. Email us with story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm KC Counts. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.